Welcome to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Rose, and this podcast exists to help illuminate the path ahead of you. With expert interviews, clinical pearls, and real client success stories, my intention is to bring you hope for what's possible on this journey and to give you tools and resources to navigate the ups and downs on the road before you. If you find this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And I have a big request. If you have a minute, can you leave us a 5-star review? And let us know, what did you learn? What did you come away with? Did you leave with that spark of hope? This helps more people like you find the podcast. My mission is to support as many humans as possible on their path to become parent. And by you sharing and subscribing, you're part of that mission too. And I'm so grateful for you for being here. Welcome back to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I am so excited for our guest today, Dr. Kalea Wattles. I'm just beyond honored, and I'm so excited about our topic today because it's necessary for everyone who is trying to conceive. But before we jump in, I just want to give people a little more knowledge about your background and how amazing you are. So Dr. Kalea is a naturopathic doctor, certified functional medicine practitioner, founder of Functional Fertility. As an educator, podcaster, speaker, and clinician, she combines cutting-edge science with treasured traditional wisdom, applying a systems biology approach to discover the root cause of fertility struggles. Thank you so much for being here. I just like to kick things off by helping people understand what led you to not only the study of naturopathic medicine, but focusing on fertility specifically.
Yes. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. We podcasted together before, so it's like a reunion, our podcast reunion. So happy to be here. I think like many of us, I found naturopathic medicine because I was struggling with my own health. I think a lot of us who end up in ND school got there because we saw a naturopathic doctor at some point and realized, wow, this is what I've been looking for. So
it seems that way, yes.
It seems that way. I'm in my ND program, and for those who are not familiar with the structure of what a program like that looks like, it's usually 4 years. I ended up stretching mine into 5 years, which I'll tell you why in a moment. But halfway through my program, so in my second year, I got pregnant with my first baby. And leading up to that, I was like, gosh, there's a lot that I don't know about ovulation and preconception care and cycle tracking. I have a nutrition degree. I'm halfway through a doctorate. If I don't know these things, there's got to be a lot of other people who are confused about this. So I started really becoming interested in how naturopathic medicine can support fertility at that point. Had this transition into motherhood and realized wow, I want this so bad for anyone else who desires to be a parent. And then continued on my naturopathic training and decided that I would focus my final clinical years really diving deep into fertility. So I essentially cold called all the fertility clinics in my area and said, listen, I know I'm not a traditional OB-GYN resident. Please, can I come be with you in clinic? I will just be a fly on the wall. I just want to see what you're doing. And fortunately, 3 clinics let me do that. So I was able to rotate with my reproductive endocrinologist in my area and watch their intakes and watch them do egg retrievals and be with them in the OR. And it gave me such an understanding of how naturopathic medicine, lifestyle medicine, functional medicine could support patients who were going through IVF. I ended up getting pregnant again in the final year of my program, had some pretty intense pregnancy complications, and that took me on an even deeper dive of, if I would have done the preconception counseling that I do for patients now, I think I could have saved myself a lot of heartache. So It's a combination of things, my interest in the science, my own experience with motherhood and pregnancy loss and pregnancy outcomes that made me feel so compelled to just get this information out there, which is, I think, what you and I both love to do.
Yeah, that's so amazing that you realized early on that's what you wanted and had the guts to cold call these doctors. Thank goodness for them for saying yes, being open-minded to having that. I've had those experiences as well, and it feels like it took about 10 phone calls before I got a yes. And it's like, oh gosh, this is when we're looking at supporting people holistically and truly providing whole person medicine, like we need a team.
Yeah,
We're not just doing this in a vacuum.
absolutely. And I always, when I'm having these conversations with patients, it's like there will be some patients for which IUI or IVF is still the best plan, but let me set you up for success, because I remember being in the intake room and um being with a patient. They were doing a lab review and she was getting ready for IVF prep, and she had really, really severe insulin resistance. Her vitamin D was like 7. It was very low iron. And that's our area to shine, right? Like lifestyle
Yeah.
medicine and nutrition and that really holistic support. That's what we do. And I wanted so bad to say, if I could have 3 months to get some of these things under control and then you move on to your IVF, I really feel confident that the outcome would be better, that you would have a healthier, safer, more enjoyable pregnancy, a smoother postpartum experience. And I just realized how much what we do can support people if they're trying to conceive for the very first time or if they're getting ready to move on. We can make a lot of progress.
Yeah. I really appreciate you mentioning that for some people, ART is going to be a
Yes.
very real and sometimes necessary option. I don't want to demonize that. I have certainly, unfortunately, seen natural health people demonize any use of Western medicine.
Yeah.
I really feel like there can be this healthy marriage between the two. And you mentioned this 3 months. Like, what's happening for 3 months before someone potentially goes through ART that might improve their outcomes?
So many things, really. But the point of it is, if we're watching an egg cell go through its entire maturation process, we have this teeny little primordial follicle, or, we have our follicle is essentially our egg sac, and our egg cell is swimming in this follicular fluid within our egg sac. So basically, we think about a little primordial egg cell that is starting to mature. That is going to grow into an antral follicle that we're going to see on the ultrasound. Is going to be big and juicy and mature enough to ovulate. That process from a primordial follicle to an antral follicle is going to take roughly 3 months. And this is the time when our egg cells are most susceptible to things like protein malnutrition and environmental toxicants and things that damage our mitochondria, which I know we're going to talk about. So it's really this critical window where our egg cell is maturing rapidly, and the things that we can do to support the health of our egg, that's our kind of our window of opportunity to implement those things and see a big difference. It's also really important conversation when we're setting expectations, kind of speaking of, maybe someone's getting ready for IUI or IVF and they'll say, okay, I want to work with you. My egg retrieval's in 2 weeks. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's great. I would love to support you. Let's talk realistically about what I can accomplish in a 2 week period, right? So sometimes hard conversations, but realistic ones.
Yes. Those are the hardest ones for me.
Yes. Yep.
Being unable to say no is something that I have had to work on a lot, just as a personal boundary over 10
Mhm.
years. But it
Yep.
is something that when we're really helping someone achieve a different outcome and they've not given themselves that time, and this is where I get a little frustrated with what might be happening behind the scenes in a reproductive endocrinologist office about the reality of, like, IVF doesn't solve your vitamin D deficiency.
Right.
IVF doesn't solve years of things affecting your mitochondrial health. So let's talk about those underlying things. You mentioned
Mhm.
mitochondria. When I think of you, I think of mitochondria.
That is such an honor to be the mitochondria queen. That's like, I've been working for that.
We need t-shirts for you. I'm telling you.
I'll get them.
So tell us about the mitochondria. Like, what is its role in the body?
Yeah. I want everyone, I know when you hear mitochondria, you're going back to your 10th grade biology teacher and you can hear them saying
1000%.
like, the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. I always joke, mitochondria have the best PR team in the game because we all know that they are the powerhouse of the cell, right? But what does that really mean? So, to give a little background on the anatomy and physiology of it all, mitochondria are these tiny structures that are found in most cells of our body. And of course, they act as the powerhouse of the cell. But what that means is that within our cells, they produce energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, if you're feeling fancy. And that energetic currency powers almost every cellular activity. And if we think about ovulation, fertilization, implantation, early embryo development. I consider that to be a very energetically expensive, those are energetically expensive processes. I mean, we're building a new human from scratch. That requires a
Yeah.
lot of cellular energy. And so a fun fact I like to share is that our egg cells have the highest concentration of mitochondrial DNA in the human body. And to put that in perspective, it's 1 to 2 orders of magnitude higher than other cells we might think of as being very energetically dependent, like neurons. So our mitochondria are extremely important for our fertility, and there's all kinds of specific implications that we can talk about. The way that our mitochondria helps our brains and our ovaries communicate. They help us make our sex hormones. There's implications in ovarian aging and sperm health. It's really such a juicy topic.
Yeah. And what are the main factors that are influencing the health and the function of our mitochondria?
If we think about kind of the drivers of our mitochondrial health, we have to explore this concept of reactive oxygen species or oxidative stress, right? Because oxidative
Yeah.
stress is how our mitochondria are damaged. So we have a generation of reactive oxygen species, and these are essentially compounds that can damage DNA. And then we have antioxidants, which are the opposite. So we're getting antioxidants, from our brightly colored fruits and vegetables and from our prenatal supplements that we're taking. And we have to have an antioxidant capacity to offset our reactive oxygen species because just by being alive and having a metabolism and engaging with the outside world, we're going to generate a little bit of oxidative stress. And that's okay, as long as we have enough antioxidant capacity to offset that exposure. Where we can run into trouble is if we have elevated oxidative stress because of elevated insulin, or like I said, environmental exposures,
Mhm.
a high glycemic diet, radiation exposure, if we're a smoker, if we're eating lots of oxidized fats. There's all kinds of different ways that we can increase our oxidative stress, and that is ultimately going to damage our mitochondria. So part of the work preconception is figuring out where those sources of oxidative stress are, and then unwinding them with lifestyle and nutrition, and sometimes supplements and medications and procedures.
Yeah. Um, One thing that has come up in practice quite a bit is when I start talking about mitochondria with my patients, and they're like, well, how do I test my
Mm-hmm.
mitochondria?
Yep,
And as a functional medicine practitioner, I'm sure you have a wealth of possible tests that you could run. Do you have any favorites?
I do. I do have some favorites, but what I want to say is I don't want to underestimate a history collection. Like you and I, as
Yes.
naturopathic doctors, know that what someone is telling us about their lived experience in their body is actually more valuable to me oftentimes than the fancy testing. I'll do the fancy testing and I love it and I love to look at the reports. But if you're telling me I'm fatigued and I have a short luteal phase and I have migraines or my body hurts, if you have a family history of autoimmune disease or fibromyalgia, like conditions of chronic pain, I'm going to suspect that there's some mitochondrial dysfunction going on. Or if I have labs existing from your basic panel and you have iron deficiency or even just iron insufficiency, it doesn't even have to be frank, like iron deficiency anemia. But if you have low iron, if you have hypothyroidism, if you have insulin resistance, or even a fasting hemoglobin A1C that's elevated, fasting insulin, I should say, or hemoglobin A1C that's elevated, I'm going to be wondering about your mitochondria. So there's so much from what you just tell me that increases my index of suspicion. If we want to do fancy testing, I'm also here for that. So my favorite, I use a test that's called the NutrEval. It's by Genova, and they include something that's called 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine. And this is really interesting because it's a marker of oxidative damage, particularly to the mitochondria. This is a molecule that forms when our bodies are exposed, like I said, to certain toxins or when our cells are damaged by different factors, like I said, radiation, sources of oxidative stress. It's found in higher levels. This 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine is found in higher levels in aging egg cells, and it might actually accelerate aging in the reproductive system. And I have such an interest in reproductive longevity, so this is something
Mhm.
I'm thinking about. And when we look in IVF studies, 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine when there's higher levels in the follicular fluid, that soup that our egg cells are swimming in, it's negatively correlated with the number of eggs retrieved and good quality embryos. So this is super important. I like to measure it. The other thing that I can get from the NutrEval is things like glutathione, which is a powerful antioxidant that circulates in our follicular fluid. We can get plant-based antioxidants. We can get CoQ10, which is a really powerful mitochondrial support nutrient. So it allows me to look at this balance of oxidative stress to antioxidants, and then I can give you antioxidant support if you need. So that's my favorite test. Do you do something different? I want to pick your brain.
I know, right? So I'm very much along the same lines as you. It's like my history is my top information gatherer, and there's
Yeah.
still so much information that I use from basic blood work. And then,
Yes.
going a little beyond the basics, like I'm still checking CRP and homocysteine and fasting insulin and hemoglobin
Absolutely.
A1C. And there have been situations in which I'm like, well, this person's already been taking 600 milligrams of CoQ10 for 2 years. What else is going on here? Like I do as much as possible, like to be targeted in supplementation. So I actually ran the version of the NutrEval that you can do at home.
Yeah, metabolomics.
Yes, I ran it on myself many
Mm-hmm.
years ago because I was like, I'm so curious. Like, after I had COVID, I had a very short luteal phase for a little while, and I was like, I want to know like what this did to my mitochondrial function. And it was interesting because I did not have a deficiency of CoQ10. There were other mitochondrial cofactors involved in what I was experiencing. And so when I was able to target my supplementation based on that, it was only a couple of cycles that it took before things normalized. And so I do reserve it for situations, and I'm like, we need to be precise.
Yeah.
And there's a little more going on under the surface than this history alone is giving me. But I use that one also. Yeah.
Uh, two things I remembered as you were saying that. Number one, I did a NutrEval on myself and I was shocked by the results. And I'm just saying that because sometimes we can have a great diet and we can be doing all the right things. But if we're stressed and we're like eating in the car and we're running around and we have no stomach acid and we're not absorbing our nutrients, we can be surprised by our results sometimes, which was the case for me. And I just wanted to underscore what you said about adding the precision and the specificity, because a lot of people come in, and I know this is true for your practice too, and they're taking like 25 supplements. And
Yes,
so they're so frustrated and they're like, I don't know if I need any of this. And it's so cumbersome and I have supplement fatigue. And when we do the testing, it allows us to only give the supplementation that is needed. And people find that it is so much easier to stick with a plan that was designed for you, not just like throwing every supplement in the world at the wall and hoping it sticks.
absolutely. I've and guilty here as well. Like
Yes,
I've
we
been
all
there.
are.
But yeah, when you've read all the books and you read the blogs, and this happened, for your sister and your neighbor's cousin, and they took this and that, and you end up with like this melting pot of things that aren't customized, that alone could be a stressor that could then lead to you not absorbing any of it very well. And so it is, when we pull back the curtain on what your body needs, it does clear this path that we didn't have before. So
Yes,
I
yes.
like I like that precision too. What can we do more from a lifestyle standpoint? You
Mhm.
listed off several things that impact increasing oxidative stress, but what would be like your top lifestyle factors that we can change that will impact our mitochondrial health positively?
Yes, love this. So, lifestyle is the foundation of all of our most successful treatment plans. And I never want to underestimate the power of lifestyle. And I think we're all guilty of it. I certainly am too. There are the fanciest supplements and the fanciest devices and so many things that we can support our mitochondria. But if we're not calling upon these very foundational things, none of it is going to help the way that we want it to. So the first thing that I always start with is sleep, which I know that sounds so simple, but I would say 75 to 80% of my patients are not sleeping, right? Or
Yep.
they're sleeping, but they're like in their bed on Instagram until 1 a.m. and then they're falling asleep and not sleeping deeply. And I think we are in an epidemic of poor sleep in the entire world. The reason I care so much about sleep is, well, one of a million reasons, is this relationship with melatonin. So I have a rule for my patients that they are in bed before 11 p.m. in complete darkness, hopefully in a room that is relatively cool and comfy and free of a lot of things that stress them out. Between about 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. is when we are going to make our own melatonin. And melatonin concentrates into our follicular fluid, and it's probably one of the most important antioxidants that protects our egg cell from oxidative stress. And looping in this concept of reproductive longevity, like I care about this because I'm 36 and I have 2 children, but sometimes I like have a little tinge of wondering what it will be like to have another baby, and I just want to
Yeah.
make sure that the option is there when I want it. So I really think about melatonin, and we have some studies now that are looking at ovarian aging and proposing that in those who have something like a low AMH, that melatonin should be considered first-line therapy for protecting against reproductive aging. I want everyone to benefit from their own endogenous, like the melatonin that their body makes. So sleep is my rule. We also know that when we are sleep deprived, it leads to more insulin resistance, more hormonal dysfunction, more just like poor life quality. So sleep is so crucially important. Regular exercise, and for me that means moderate exercise. Like, this obviously needs to be customized to everyone, but moving your body mindfully, the kind of general recommendation is 150 minutes per week. I think the exercise that is best for everybody's body, like I said, is different. But for most people, some mindful, moderate movement most days of the week is going to be helpful. Meditation, and that also could look different for everyone, right? Like, I've found that some people really vibe with a deep breathing practice, where others it's guided visualization and imagery, where others it's compassion meditation. Sometimes we have to do some experimenting to figure out what works for you. But meditation can do so many amazing things. Not only is it calming our nervous system, which I know you are an expert in, and I always want to pick your brain about that, but the way that meditation can also increase our DHEA is fascinating to me. And DHEA it's a hormone that's produced by the adrenal glands, but we find that it can really support energy production within our egg cells. It is a mitochondrial support in and of itself. So meditation is something I really think about. Like I said, focusing on antioxidant capacity. So eating the rainbow. We even have a checklist at my house. It's like this little thing where we can check off red, orange, yellow, and make sure that we're eating all the foods.
I
I
need to
think
get one of those for my kids.
my kids are obsessed. It's so fun. And
Taking
then you get to the
notes.
end of the day and you're like, oh, shoot, we haven't had enough blue today. Blue and purple are the hardest because there's only so many foods. Anyway, eat the rainbow. And then we can talk about, do we want to start to layer on the red light therapy and the supplements? And those are all great options, but we have to be sleeping, eating nutritious foods, moving our body, managing our stress, and also having healthy relationships where we feel nourished and supported. Like, all of that is so good for our cellular health.
Yeah. Thank you for saying sleep.
The big one.
I've gotten a little bit of, pushback from some patients who are like, well, I'm sleeping good enough. And I'm like, what is good enough? Tell me more about this. That's like it tends to be the most resistant lifestyle factor that I get pushback around.
Yeah.
And the one that people notice the biggest difference in once they have it tuned in.
Yes.
Right? So like our handout on sleep and circadian rhythm function in the Brilliant Fertility Program has like expanded so much. It's like pretty much a book at this point over
Yeah.
the years, because it really is that important. Like it is, if we're making our pyramid of cellular health, like that is the foundation on my pyramid that
Yeah.
I describe to my clients. So I'm so glad we're on the same page about that. I
And
hope
the
everyone's
way,
taking notes.
and getting it to bed early, and the way that our sleep, I guess our relationship, our light and darkness cues impact our hormones is also so important. And I wonder, um, if it's okay with you, maybe I'll take like 1 minute and tell this love story between mitochondria and granulosa
Absolutely.
cells. Is that
Oh,
okay?
yeah, I'm ready.
I just feel like this is the perfect lead in and we have to talk about this. So this is an opportunity for me to introduce granulosa cells. And this is maybe so nerdy, but as doctors, I think
So nerdy and I love it.
many of us have a favorite cell type and granulosa cells are mine. So there is a relationship between granulosa cells and mitochondria. So let me back up. Granulosa cells are the largest cell population in the ovary. And when we talk about those ovarian follicles, these are largely made of granulosa cells. Those, I call them the nourishing cells, the egg cell support team, but they play a crucial role in the development of an egg because they provide nourishment and support to our developing egg. They produce hormones like estrogen. They receive hormonal signals from the brain. And we know that during ovulation, our mature egg, it ruptures from its follicle, right? It bursts from the follicle, and then those remaining granulosa cells form a structure that's called the corpus luteum. It fills with fat, it starts pumping out progesterone, and that progesterone is going to sustain the endometrium during our luteal phase and will further support a potential pregnancy. The relationship with mitochondria here is that our granulosa cells they're very energetically dependent. And so the growth and the proliferation and the division of our granulosa cells requires abundant and stable mitochondria so that they can give our egg cells all the energy that they need to mature and grow and get big enough and juicy enough to ovulate. So when we have mitochondrial dysfunction, it actually disrupts this bidirectional communication that happens between our egg cells and their helpers, the granulosa cells, which can lead to stagnant cell growth, kind of arrested egg cell maturation. We might see more anovulatory cycles or more luteal phase dysfunction, lower progesterone. So like you said, you had a shorter luteal phase. You did your nutritional evaluation, found that there was all this mitochondrial support you could do. You fixed that and your luteal phase got better, right? This is one of those relationships. When patients come to me and they're like, my luteal phase is 9 days and my progesterone never gets very high, this is why I'm really thinking about the mitochondria because of their relationship to the granulosa cells.
For anyone who was listening and you want to swap over to YouTube so you can see how Dr. Kalea's face lights up when she talks about this, it's my favorite.
We love
It brings me back to our pathology classes when they would show you the pictures of the different cells and like I love
Yes.
yeah, it's one of my favorites too. It's like it's a chunky cell. Like
Chunky. Yes.
it's a real beautiful looking cell. There's a lot happening there. And I think just the knowledge that it is this cell that lines the follicle that then creates the corpus luteum. Like the follicular phase is feeding into the luteal phase. This is all connected. And then our mitochondria is also being passed to our children. We
Oh,
get our mitochondria from our maternal line. And so, what we are doing to support people's mitochondria when they're struggling to conceive, like this is not just impacting this one human, like this is impacting potentially generations.
yes. Thank you so much for saying that. This is so fascinating. If anyone wants to read about it, go Google mitochondrial Eve, and you will have a billion articles to read that are so interesting, this maternal inheritance pattern. But yes, I cannot agree more that supporting our mitochondria is really creating generational health for our children, for our grandchildren. It's one of the most impactful things I think we can do to support our own longevity and then to create abundant health through our offspring, which is why I focus on
Yes.
it so much in this preconception timeframe.
Yes. Some of you know that my mom recently had a heart attack, and it has led me down this rabbit hole of trying to better understand the connections between mitochondrial health and heart health in someone who otherwise had a very healthy metabolic picture, no overt cardiovascular disease like elevated cholesterol or plaques. But the relationship between mitochondria and the health of the actual muscle
Yeah.
of the heart, like this is important stuff. So for those people who are listening are like, okay, well, this is just a temporary phase of my life that I need to do this. Like, no, this is actually setting a foundation not only for your fertility longevity, but like your long-term health, like decades beyond now.
Oh, thinking about reducing the risk for, like you said, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline later in life, so
Yes,
important.
absolutely. Yes.
I think about this all the time because in my second pregnancy, just to put the whole context around this, I was 29 years old. Like I said, I have a nutrition degree. I was eating very healthy foods. I was like doing all the things. I had pregnancy-induced hypertension. My blood pressure was out of control and had to, I like risked out of midwifery care, had to get induced at 37 weeks. So the whole thing was kind of traumatic. And now I know that there is a relationship between oxidative stress, mitochondrial health, and blood pressure during pregnancy. And I
Yeah,
wish I would have known because I would have prepared. You don't know what you don't know, right? I would have prepared
absolutely.
differently going into that pregnancy. But that's another reason that I'm so passionate about this because I want to save others from that experience. And uh, there are those cardiovascular connections that we can't ignore.
Absolutely. This could lead us into another completely different conversation. It might have to be part
Okay,
two
we'll rope
because
us back.
I know that you are passionate about nitrous oxide, nitric oxide, different
Yep.
from nitrous and nitric oxide are different. Let me just
Which
go back
is very
and
confusing.
yes, it does get confusing, especially for people who, aren't used to having to read the scientific journals and have these, long fancy words for things. Not that you need to. This is why you have teams. You
Yeah,
have people
yeah.
who are in your corner. But the relationship between nitric oxide and how this helps to keep our endothelial lining nice and happy and our blood vessels flexible and able to vasodilate properly. I realize that is a whole nother ball of wax, but
It's cool though.
it's
It's
an
cool.
important conversation.
Yeah.
So
And it, we can,
if we could summarize like the importance of it, especially
yes,
since you're, discussing your experience with pregnancy induced hypertension, give us like a maybe 1 minute rundown.
I'd love to. And I also want to connect this in a moment to iron. If I forget, will you remind me?
Yeah.
Okay. So nitric oxide is a compound that helps our blood vessels dilate. And what we're learning more and more is that healthy blood flow through our ovaries and through our endometrium is one of the most impactful aspects of our fertility, of healthy ovarian function. I heard a reproductive endocrinologist, this brilliant REI who was speaking at a conference I was attending, and he said, um, ovarian health is really just a function of capillary blood flow. And I think you and I have even talked about that before because I think about it literally every day. And I know you do acupuncture, and I wish I was an acupuncturist, and I send everyone to acupuncture because of the way that it supports such healthy blood flow. Blood flow through our ovaries not only brings in fresh nutrition to our ovarian tissue, it also brings in hormonal signals from the brain, and it brings out waste products. When we think about the endometrium requires a lot of fresh blood so that it can grow nice and thick and fluffy and be this amazing landing spot for an embryo. When we have a lot of oxidative stress, it can impair our nitric oxide production. And then that can affect the way that our blood vessels develop in a placenta. That's what happened to me. The blood vessels were very tiny as they were developing because they just didn't have a lot of dilation. Now, I've done a lot of reflection about this over the years. I mean, that baby who was born from that pregnancy is about to turn 7, which is wild to me, but it's given me a lot of time to reflect on this. And my midwife at the time said, I know it's frustrating and scary to have elevated blood pressure, but really what my body was doing is I had these, tiny, narrow blood vessels, and I needed to get blood to my baby. So my body increased my blood pressure to force, to kind of perfuse the blood through those blood vessels so that my baby was still healthy. So while it was scary, the compensatory mechanism did what it needed to do. It kept my baby safe. So I've been able to show some gratitude towards the hypertension, which I was in the moment, I was very bitter towards it, but now I'm able to look back and say, okay, my body did what it needed to do. But having hypertension also comes with some downstream effects that we want to avoid. So I love to focus on things that support nitric oxide production during our 2-week wait so
Mhm.
that we can get lots of fresh blood flow. So that means beets and pomegranates and nuts and seeds and leafy greens. I love a beet chew. I use the Human brand. I think they're delicious. Um, and I remember to go back to iron because not only is iron an extremely important mitochondrial support nutrient, our mitochondria require heme, so they need adequate iron to function. But iron also delivers oxygen to our ovaries and to our endometrium and to our brain, like to all our vital organs. So when we have low iron, we can see atrophy or wasting away within the ovarian tissue. So that might look like more anovulatory cycles. It might look like lower ovarian reserve. So it's the blood flow and it's the iron and it's the mitochondria. And that's why a systems biology, functional medicine, naturopathic medicine approach is so helpful.
I am curious, what percentage of your patients are you catching, maybe not an overt iron deficiency anemia, but suboptimal iron levels?
High percentage, maybe half even.
Yeah,
And that means like
ditto. It's
hematocrit and
high.
hemoglobin are normal. Maybe even iron and TIBC are normal, but ferritin is, I had someone with ferritin, it was 3 the other day, which is maybe the lowest ferritin I've seen. But I
That
like to
is the
see
lowest ferritin I've seen. I thought 4 was rough. I picked up a 4, but
4 is
oh,
pretty rough. We see in the literature ferritin below 40 is associated with more anovulatory cycles. So I like to get mine 50 to 80 if I can. What about
yeah,
you?
ditto. Absolutely.
It's hard in a menstruating female sometimes, though, especially if there's like an endometriosis or something going on where there's really heavy menses. It's hard.
Yeah, or adeno or fibroids.
Yes.
And yet, I do find that when we focus on the foundations so that they're absorbing their nutrients and their nervous system is regulated, so they're actually producing stomach acid, like there's so many
Yes.
factors that we can layer in to improve the likelihood of their iron supplementation, and their dietary changes with more bioavailable iron can actually work better.
Yeah.
It takes some time, and those are the ones that are the hardest for me when they come in and they're like, my retrieval's scheduled for this date in 2 weeks, and I'm like, well, I cannot correct an iron deficiency that fast.
It's so hard. But
Yeah.
yes, to the stomach acid. That was my problem when I had low iron, low B vitamins. It just wasn't absorbing. My stomach acid was like non-existent at that point. And that's why one day I'm going to reach out to you for you to teach me all your ways about the nervous system regulation, because I think that's underappreciated in
Yeah.
terms of how that affects our normal physiology.
Yeah. And I mean, to some degree, like, we've already talked about things that can improve that, right? Different styles
Mhm.
of meditation, not giving up if you tried one thing and you're like, that wasn't for me,
Yeah.
but also understanding that our tools for regulating the nervous system need to match the emotion that we're feeling. And if we are in a state where we're not even in touch with our emotions, if we haven't had the capacity to name them and know what to do next, then that's challenging. We're not born with that manual.
We certainly are not. But that's why you exist. So,
And I feel like we've really come full circle here, because we've really run the gamut of, starting with like how naturopathic medicine can support someone who might be approaching assisted cycles. But
yeah.
I am curious if you witness like people who may have been all set to do these assisted cycles, but then they get all these great formulas for their own custom protocol to get their nutrients on board and
Yeah.
their oxidative stress down. And do you ever see people who end up conceiving without having to go through those treatments too?
Of course. Of course we see that sometimes, and it's always like a little bittersweet, I have to say, because oftentimes if you have pursued, maybe you did your egg retrieval and then you're taking some time off to prepare your endometrium before you're going to do your embryo transfer, and then you get pregnant on your own, like you've already invested so much financially, emotionally, energetically into this process. So it's always like, I'm so happy, but what the heck?
Yeah.
Right? So it's great. And I love when it happens, but also I think that it can stir some things up. But what a blessing, like we've said, that we're making this investment in our health going into a healthy pregnancy, knowing that we want the freedom to enjoy our health and enjoy this family that we've worked so hard for. So, I feel grateful that we have skills not only from the medical management standpoint, but also, like you said, an open-mindedness to support someone wherever they are in their fertility journey. And if they happen to conceive on their own, that is amazing and so wonderful. But whatever it takes, we know what tools to call upon. And I think that's something I'm
Yeah.
so proud of about what we do.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Kalea, thank you so much for all of your amazing wisdom on functional fertility. And how can people find you?
You can head to my website at drkaleawattles.com. You'll find information about the Functional Fertility podcast there, about my one-to-one offerings, my online fertility program. But then find me on Instagram at Functional Fertility. That's where I spend the most time and love to connect with you all there. So thank you. Thank you so
Yes,
much for having
we
me.
love your Instagram posts. You also have a guide for your favorite low tox products for our listeners. So we'll make sure to link that in the show notes.
Yes.
And since we talked about sleep, I'll go ahead and link the guide to our circadian rhythm and sleep optimization from the Brilliant Fertility Program too. And thank you so much for being here. Any final words of wisdom for someone who is just feeling really anxious about getting started on their fertility journey and is feeling like they don't know where to go?
Where do we go next? Take bite-sized pieces one day at a time. Start working with someone who's willing to take a really comprehensive look at your health. And I always say, if you don't know what else to do, just do your preconception labs first. That is going to give you so much information. That's probably a whole other episode about what labs to even get, but these are basic, things looking at your thyroid function, your hormones, your inflammatory markers, your metabolic markers, couple key nutrients. That is going to give you so much information. And these are things, they're not, anything fancy. These are things ordered at your regular lab. It's a regular blood draw. It's probably well covered by insurance, and just start there.
Thank you. That helps. I love bite-sized pieces.
Yeah, we all need it.
All right. And those of you who are still listening, feel free to pop over to Dr. Kalea's Instagram, send us a DM, let us know what your biggest takeaway from this episode was. And feel free to leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. We love hearing from you and what you want to learn about next. Before you go, did you know starting July 25th, I am hosting a 3-day virtual fertility retreat? Why a retreat? Well, I've seen so many challenges and boot camps and cleanses, and honestly, in 11 years of practice, I've noticed that most of my patients are overdoing things. There's no need for us to have more challenges. There's no need for this very masculine energy doing to be in this space any longer. In fact, when we learn how to slow down, tune into intuition, we don't need another boot camp. We don't need another to-do list. We need empowerment, simplicity, and individualization. So join us for this 3-day retreat. You can sign up in the show notes, add these dates to your calendar on Thursday, July 25th, Tuesday, July 30th, and Thursday, August 1st. And imagine coming away feeling calmed, empowered, resourceful in your fertility journey. And I also believe in making learning fun. So not only can you expect to walk away with some quality resources to help you optimize fertility, but we'll have some fun giveaways and opportunities with this retreat as well. You can head to brilliantfertility.com/3-day-virtual-retreat. Gosh, lots of dashes in there, but the link is in the show notes. And if you have any questions about this, please head over to Instagram, shoot me a DM about the 3-day fertility retreat, and I hope to see you there.